What a lovely time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, today we're going to take a break from the Luther movie because I'm actually here today. Yesterday I was presenting with Ms. Kearns about sophomores. It was a fun-filled day for me.
I just all of us heard that they were kind of
I'm glad it could.
Do you know what they're doing in the lower cafeteria?
What's that?
Do you know what they're doing in the lower cafeteria?
I think that's ELA testing.
Sorry, I just
know what that
is.
I do not know when that will be done.
I just want to eat. And all of them are broken.
Oh, they'll be done by lunch.
Sorry, John.
I know, but I have
I
eight
tried
in
to
the
say I
back.
had to go back.
I just don't want to. Here, just kidding. We can't go
Okay.
Me too.
Go.
She called them hot mess.
No hatch today?
For what scholarship?
You do, unless you take pictures of the very best.
Wow!
It's 22 on the math section for math. Okay. This time we're going to be taking a look at, so take a pen out and we'll circle through the things that you need to know.
Wait, are we doing that conference?
We're going to do another one. Okay. Another math quiz. So, these are the ones that you need, these are the cities that you need to be familiar with. Cities, yes.
Okay.
Cities and oceans, or seas. Well, there you go. This is the time.
Let's go.
Okay, are we ready? All right, senior year, hopefully you get some geography skills.
I learned those in 7th grade. I
Okay.
did not miss me.
Are we ready? Okay, the Atlantic Ocean. Hopefully you know that one.
The North, I think?
Yeah, that would be fine. It's all part of the Atlantic. Okay, now as far as cities. Dublin,
I danced here.
okay? Dublin,
Okay.
okay. Edinburgh, which is in Scotland, northern UK.
That's where Prince of,
Is that what you said?
Yes,
That's what my dad said.
okay. Well, they would pronounce it Edinburgh, but that's all right. Okay, London.
Okay, I know where
I know where that is.
What a pretty place.
Okay.
I'm still looking for
Now, folks,
here, right here.
now we're going to go down to France. Okay. Or between there, you're going to need to label the English Channel. That is the water between the UK and France. Are we good? The English Channel.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Then next, we're going to have Paris. Then at the very bottom, Marseille, which is on the coast. Circle that one. You see Marseille. Okay. Now we'll move to the left and go to Spain, and the country that or the city that I want you to know there is Madrid. Okay. Okay. Then the other one that I want you to be aware of in Spain is Seville, or Sevilla if you're speaking Spanish. Okay. Then over here to the far left in Portugal, Lisbon. Now, we move over to the Mediterranean Sea, and I want you to know where the Mediterranean Sea is. Then we go to Italy, and I want you to know where Rome is. And the other city that I want you to know is Florence. We go to the left, far left down in Greece, and I want you to know where Athens is. If you look at Turkey, I would like you to know where Istanbul is. You see Istanbul, used to be known as Constantinople. Okay. Now if you go to Switzerland, that is north of Italy. I'd like you to know where Geneva is. Then I would like you to go up to Germany and get Berlin. Then I would like you to go up to Denmark and get Copenhagen. Then I would like you to go over to Russia and get Moscow. Then, bless you, I would like you to go over between the UK and Norway and circle the North Sea. Okay, bless you. And let's call it a day there. Okay, so that is a total then, to make sure that I and you have the same amount circled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, correct?
Sure.
Are we good? Let's do this on Friday. Today's Tuesday. We can make this happen. Okay, questions? You guys ever done anything with Europe like that before?
Yeah.
School?
Miss McGee did.
That one. It's
Miss McGee did.
not for my class.
Did you get Istanbul?
Yes. Yeah, I only have 22.
Do you have 22?
But you don't have it. I don't.
All right, folks. Today we are going to finish up with John Calvin, and then we're going to move on to the English Reformation. John Calvin Oh, thank you so much. Okay, John Calvin. We talked about him last time. Of course, he's a very influential first person in the Protestant Reformation. He is responsible for Calvinism, among other items. Okay, and let's talk about where he's coming from and what he's doing. First of all, he develops this idea of predestination. And just in review, what is predestination?
Like, you don't have any, like, second opinion God or
Right, you don't have any free will. And the reason he says that is because of his idea of the majesty of God. If God knows everything, including every outcome, then he argues, logically, everything must be predetermined. And he argued for the concept of the elect, and I think we discussed all of this in here. Are there any questions before we move on from that? Okay? Now, Calvin is from Geneva, Switzerland. And he's going to have one of the first real massive conflicts about religious toleration quickly thereafter. In Geneva, Switzerland today, there is a statue of Michael Servetus right there. The reason Servetus has a statue is he was burned at the stake by John Calvin.
Oh,
Servetus is a very interesting person. I wrote my master's thesis on him. And not that it matters to you guys, but the whole thing about Michael Servetus is he grew up in Spain during the time of the Reconquista, which means that during his lifetime, when he was a young man, there were Muslims, Jews, and Christians all percolating in Spain. And Servetus is basically going to argue that for a Unitarian belief, he is going to argue that there's one God and that he's trying to unify Islam, Judaism, and Christianity back into one faith. Servetus is really a Renaissance man. Servetus is the first Westerner to discover pulmonary circulation. Up until this time, where did they think the heart would beat? Or where did they think the heart was, rather? It was the center of your chest, and they thought it was about emotion. They basically thought that was like your brain, because it would increase with your emotion and not. They didn't realize that was pulmonary. There's actually, the circulatory system. Servetus is the first guy to realize that in Europe. Okay? And so he's important in a variety of ways. Servetus's theology was that of a Unitarian. That is, he wanted to he was against kind of the idea of the Trinity. He was trying to say that there's one God, and it's the same God for the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, and we need to strip away all of this extraneous ideas. And for that belief, do you think Servetus was real popular with the Catholic Church? No. Was he real popular with the Protestants? No. Everyone pretty well hated him. So he went around from place to place, and he was fluent in 5 different languages. He was a brilliant, very charismatic guy. He was also what my grandpa would call a smart acre. Okay? He always liked telling everyone how smart he was. So he and Servetus were pen pals. Servetus and John Calvin were pen pals for a while. Okay? And what he did is, what he being Calvin did, is he mailed Servetus a copy of his book, The Institutes of the Christian Religion. So he mailed this to him, and he said, "Oh, okay, would you make some comments on it?" Well, Servetus went to town. He would write in the margins, "This is stupid, this is dumb, I don't like this, what are you possibly thinking, this contradicts this," and mailed it back to him. Calvin was dumbfounded, and he tried to write him back, and Servetus basically wrote him back saying, "Hey, this is beyond crap. There's no way that this is salvageable, just start all over again." So that kind of ended their pen pal relationship. Until one day, in 1552, Calvin, of course, is the head pastor in Geneva, Switzerland. And what kind of government do they have in Geneva, Switzerland? It's a theocracy. Church and state are one. So he's up there. It's Sunday morning. Calvin is preaching. He's bringing it. It's, hellfire and brimstone. And then, guess what? Servetus stands up in the middle of the Sunday morning church service. And he says, "Lies. Damnable lies. Everything this man says is false prophecy. If you follow John Calvin, you will go to hell." Well, what happens to Servetus? He's arrested. And he's arrested on charges of heresy. And there is a trial, and during the trial, of course, Calvin and his forces say, "So, Michael Servetus, do you deny that Jesus is divine?" "Yes. I'm a Unitarian. I believe that there's one God, not a triune." He denied the Trinity. Jesus was a prophet, but not, God's son. So that's kind of where he's coming from on this. Well, and Servetus is really upfront with his perspective on this, which really pretty much is just like damning his case. So he is found guilty of heresy. He is taken to the town center, And he is the inspiration for the famous Doors song, "Come On Baby Light My Fire," because what do? They burn him. Now, you might say, well, Reeves, who cares? The Spaniard gets barbecued. Big honkin' deal. It's been over 500 years. Well, one of the guys who read about this and was kind of a free-thinking Protestant in Europe was a dude by the name of Sebastian Castellio. And he wrote a book aptly called On Toleration, because it was about tolerance. He said, look, I don't deny that Servetus was ill-mannered and rude and kind of a smart anchor and a punk. But what I do have a problem with is the fact that you guys burned him. Because what is the fundamental or basic belief that Protestants have? No. I mean, that's a good rule to have. I've tried to live my life by that fact. Do not burn people. Okay?
I have an entire religion about not burning people.
Do not barbecue people. Follow me, people, and together we will not illuminate people in the barbecue pit. No propane accessories will ever be used upon your soul. Yeah, that would be nice. But there's also something else. What is it? Not sola scriptura is nice, but it's priesthood of the
Believer.
Priesthood of the believer. You know, if the idea is you got to have faith, what can we not do? Tell you exactly how to have faith. We can't compel you to believe. If you believe crazy crap, good for you. But it's like you can't compel anyone to love somebody, and that's what faith is. You know, you must love this person or we will burn you, or we will imprison you, or we will shackle you. What Castellio said is, look, Protestants, if you really believe faith is the way, gravity is a harsh mistress, isn't it? You're welcome. Then what you got to do is that you gotta not persecute people. Let them believe what they want to believe. Now, it's going to take a while for this to take hold, okay? It's not going to be immediate, but ultimately, Castellio's ideas are going to be very influential on my homeboy. John Locke is going to argue the same thing that Sebastian Castellio does about 100 years later, that you got to have freedom of conscience. Okay, now, why do we care about John Calvin today and his ideas? Well, here are a couple of reasons. One, Puritan New England. The Puritans who came to the New World on the Mayflower in 1620 and then, the Salem witch trials and all that jazz, they were Calvinists. So they had a profound influence on the first 200 years of American history and colonial American history at that. So that's pretty important. And that's significant. Okay? There's also something else that I think is very important when you look at this, and it's called, Max Weber's thesis. Weber's thesis. It's developed from his very famous book, The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which was written in 1904. Weber was a historian. He was a founder of sociology. He was a German economist. He, was a jack of all trades intellectually. But Weber came up with something that I think is incredibly important and incredibly powerful. He noticed a trend in the history of Europe. And this is what that trend is. He looked at a map of Europe, and on this map, he saw something very remarkable. Northern Europe tended to be Protestant. Southern Europe tended to be Catholic. Now, there were some exceptions from country to country, but for the most part, everything to the north, Germany, the Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic at different times, the UK, all Protestant nations. And what were they economically? all really strong capitalist nations. They put the pedal to the metal with the Industrial Revolution. And the work weeks were a lot longer there. United States, Calvinist Protestant for the most part. I mean, when you look at the United States, how many of the 45 presidents that we've had have been white Anglo-Saxon Protestants?
44.
44. With John Kennedy being the only non-Protestant. Okay? Barack Obama, I see you may be thinking of him. His mom was a white woman from Kansas, so I'm kind of giving him a pass as a Protestant in this as well, because that was his heritage, at least on half his familial line. And he is a Protestant too. But the thing of it is that all of these countries, all of these Protestant countries, embraced capitalism. And Weber had a theory about why that was. If you're Catholic, Cody, or Maria, or Bridget,
Maybe we should say Bridget.
Bridget, if you're Catholic,
Yeah.
Bridget,
Yeah.
what do you have to do to get to heaven? What are you supposed to do? Well, not sin, but if you do sin, occasionally we all would sin. Everyone except Bridget. What would you do?
Go to confession.
You would go to confession. So, where do you get access to God? Through the church and the sacraments, right?
Yes.
So I sin, I go to confession, I go listen to Father Hank, we'll pretend you're a man, okay? And you will absolve me, all's good. So, right?
Yeah.
So you have some security in how you get to heaven. So that's kind of that's Weber saying this is kind of the Catholic view. Okay? You got some control, some free will. If you're Calvin, how do you know if you're part of the elect? You don't. So this is what Weber said. Protestant Calvinists worked their derrieres off. And the reason they worked their derrieres off is they wanted to be rich. Not so much that they even just wanted to be rich, although that's awesome, but because they wanted to get some reassurance that they are part of the elect. If I have a big house and 5 cars and a boat, this must indicate that God loves me. So what he argued, what Weber argued, is that capitalism developed in these Protestant nations, Northern Europe and the United States, because Calvinism made these Protestants feel so unsure of their salvation that they wanted to work doubly hard to prove to themselves economically that they were successful. And I think there is some underlying basis for Weber's theology. Obviously, there are some holes in it, but it does explain, because you look at Italy. What are famous industrial goods that come from Italy? What? Well, not a lot. You think of France, what do you think of? The Eiffel Tower. You don't really think of big industrial goods. How many of you want to buy like a French car? I gotta buy me a Renault. Nobody. Okay? How many of you would like to buy a German car, a Mercedes, or a BMW? Okay?
I'd rather have like a Lamborghini.
Lamborghini. They do have some exotic sport cars, I will give you that, but not big mass production things from Italy. Okay? And so, this has got, Weber's argument and Calvin's influence on the U.S. and Europe. This is kind of big stuff. This makes sense to you guys?
Yes.
Okay. Like I said, there are some holes in his theory, but it's pretty profound. Okay. One other group that we need to take a look at before we sum all this up is Henry VIII. Okay. Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Henry VIII, by the way, what a handsome-looking guy right there. Look at those calves. Nothing says like calves.
He's power posing.
Yes, he is power posing. All right, let's talk a little bit about the English Reformation, where this comes from. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Question.
Yeah.
Whenever Max Baker was looking at like that kind of stuff, was it also correct? Because he was alive in 1904, right?
Yeah.
So was he looking at like that from John Calvin's time or from his time as well?
He was looking at it applied to today.
Okay.
Okay, or his what would have been 1904.
Yeah.
So he was looking at to explain why those countries were so economically powerful with capitalism in 1904. Good question. The English Reformation. You could make an argument that the Lutheran Reformation and the Catholic Reformation was about a change in religious beliefs. The English Reformation, ladies and gentlemen, was basically about sex and power and nothing else. Beliefs really meant very little in that. I won't say that for everyone, but for most, that's pretty much what it was. You may recall at the end of last semester, we talked about the War of the Roses.
Yes.
And that was a fairly destructive war. And of course, as we mentioned, that's kind of the model war for Game of Thrones, if you will. So, there's a lot of power intrigue in that. Ultimately, at the end of that, Richard III dies at the Battle of Bosworth in 1805, the last English, in 1485, I apologize, 1485, Battle of Bosworth Field. And of course, his famous line, "My kingdom for a horse," after he fell off and killed. And of course, they found poor Richard III very recently when they were excavating a mall or trying to build a mall parking lot outside of London. But Henry Tudor ends the War of the Roses and becomes king in 1485. Now, England was kind of like a second tier or third tier European power at that time. Very respectable country, but it was not a major power player in European politics. The major power player in European politics around this time was going to be Spain. And why was Spain such a big, powerful country at this time? What had Spain just discovered? The New World. You got it, Cody. And because they discovered the New World, they were importing a lot of gold and silver from the Americas. They were very wealthy, and their family was also well-placed and controlled basically what's the Holy Roman Empire. The monarch that you saw in that film yesterday, Charles V, was the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, and he ruled basically what would be all of Central Europe and Spain and the New World. Very powerful dude. Very powerful family. So what's the best way to make sure that you get a piece of this power? You marry into it. So Ferdinand and Isabella, the king and queen of Spain, had a daughter, Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine of Aragon was engaged to and betrothed to Arthur Tudor. Now, Arthur was the oldest son of Henry VII. And so they're engaged. Everything is great. In fact, they even get married. And shortly thereafter, what happens to Arthur Tudor? He dies. He gets an illness and passes away. So what's Catherine? A widow. And suddenly, Henry Tudor is like, man, this is awful. I worked to arrange this marriage. I got this all set, and now he's gone.